Welcome everyone to our Riparian Restoration Technology webinar presented by Rivers Edge West. My name is Nicole Cook and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for Rivers Edge West. If you're not familiar with our workshop series, right now we do workshop series and then conference years every other year. So this is the third workshop of our workshop series this year, and I'll share a little bit about some upcoming events we have as well. But thank you all so much for joining us. A couple of housekeeping notes. Today we're going to be using the Q&A option on Zoom to send in any questions. So if you're an attendee, hopefully you can see and hear all of our hosts and panelists today, but you won't be able to come off camera or turn your microphone on. So you'll need to send things in through the Q&A. If you do want to come on screen, you can send a request our way, and if the timing's appropriate, I can add people in, but for the most part, we're going to use that chat Q&A function. So the format today, we're going to start with some welcome and introductions with me. Then we'll move on to John Leary, our Senior Restoration and GIS Project Manager for Rivers Edge West, and he's going to give an overview of our organization and the importance of these workshops and webinars that we host. And then we'll hear from our three speakers, and John will introduce each of our speakers, Sara, Alicia, and Danny. Thank you all so much for agreeing to be part of this webinar. And then we'll have a panel at the end for any additional questions moderated by John. So along the way, we will have time after each presentation for questions. If we run out of time, don't worry, there will be plenty of time to ask those in the panel. We'll be keeping tabs on the Q&A section. So if we don't get to your question then, we will get to it during the panel. All right. I also wanted to thank all of our workshop series sponsors. Chevron Colorado is one of our River Champion sponsors, CWCB, Colorado Water Conservation Board, and SWCA are Cottonwood sponsors. Deer or Desert Ecosystem Analysis and Restoration is our Willow sponsor. And then, of course, we also want to thank our seedling sponsors, the Colorado River District, Garfield County, KLJ Engineering, Strategic by Nature, and Tetra Tech. So thank you all so much. This workshop series wouldn't be possible without their help, and it's part of how we're able to offer this webinar free of charge to all of our attendees. Okay, so I mentioned some upcoming events. We'll have our final workshop of our workshop series in October, from October 2nd through 3rd, focusing on riparian restoration on private lands, especially looking at wildlife. And that will be one of our first events at our new home, the Confluence Center, which will be a shared space for nonprofits here in Grand Junction. So if you want to join us in person, that would be great. We're hoping to have a virtual option as well. And then, of course, we have our big conference coming up March 3rd through 5th, 2026. So save the date. We'll be sending out our call for abstracts soon. So keep an eye out for that. And again, if you have any technical difficulties or questions along the way, send those in the Q&A, and one of the Rivers Edge West staff will address those questions as they come up. I'll put this up again at the end of our webinar today, but we do have a short survey for you all to provide feedback, suggestions for future workshops, and things like that. But thank you all again so much for joining us. And now we'll hear from my coworker, John Leary, and he's going to share a little bit about Rivers Edge West.
Hello and welcome to our webinar on riparian restoration technology. My name is John Leary. I'm a project manager with Rivers Edge West, and I will be moderating the webinar and the panel at the end. The questions after each speaker will be fielded probably by Melissa that come in through the Q&A. Before getting into a short intro for Rivers Edge West in our workshop series, I did want to recognize a few more people and do a little bit of housekeeping. We had some help from partners early on trying to narrow down topics and speakers. And so I just wanted to give a thanks to Trout Unlimited, the River Network, and Utah State University for helping us with those early conversations. Of course, thank you to our speakers, Sara, Alicia, and Danny, and thank you all for being here. We look forward to your questions and comments for the speakers. And on that note, as Nicole said, we did switch to a webinar format based on the number of registrations. So the attendee cameras and microphones are off. So please use the Q&A option to submit your comments and questions. And also, as Nicole said, if we need to and there's time, we can add you to speak and have your camera on as well. Each speaker will present for about 20 minutes, followed by about 5 minutes of questions, and there is a moderated panel at the end of the discussion, at the end of the webinar. So there is more time for questions if you don't have time after each speaker. And so just a little background on River's Edge West for those folks who might be less familiar with us. We are a 9-person nonprofit based in Grand Junction, Colorado. Our focus is on riparian vegetation, health, and restoration, especially in the southwest rivers impacted by tamarisk and Russian olive. We started as the Tamarisk Coalition around 1999, treating tamarisk on the Colorado River here in Mesa County. We grew over the years. We changed our name in 2018 to River's Edge West to reflect a more holistic approach to riparian restoration and to emphasize that we are not a coalition in support of tamarisk, which was a common mistake that we heard from. Over the years, we've had various roles in a lot of watershed partnerships across the Southwest. And this map shows the restoration partnerships that we either formed, coordinated, or supported, or partnered with in some way throughout our history. And these are some of those roles with those groups, both past and present. As an organization, we provide capacity for planning, partnership development, and project management. We provide technical and fundraising support, help with outreach, and connecting groups with the resources or people that they need to succeed. This map represents our current, what we call our spectrum of engagement, with a darker hub in our main focus area in Grand Junction and Western Colorado and Eastern Utah. From Grand Junction, we have 3 restoration coordinators that lead 3 partnerships. We have the Desert Rivers Collaborative on the Gunnison and Colorado main stem rivers here in Mesa County, the Dolores River Restoration Partnership on the Dolores River in Colorado and Utah, and the White River Partnership also in Colorado and Utah. We also have a private lands biologist, which is a partner position with the NRCS, and they work on private lands also in the Desert Rivers Collaborative area. And we like partnerships. We use partnerships as a tool for a lot of reasons. We use them to improve collaboration and communication at the landscape scale, identify common goals across that landscape, show broad support for restoration, leverage resources, build capacity, and promote long-term stewardship and success of our projects. A couple other programs that we have is our volunteer stewardship program to host volunteer events throughout the summer in the Grand Junction area. And we're also a founding partner of the West Slope Outdoor Volunteers, which is a really cool program of a group of local nonprofits and volunteers that coordinate volunteer events. And it makes a one-stop shop for connecting organizations that need help with the volunteers that are looking to get involved. The River Corridor Initiative is a regional planning effort for the Colorado and Gunnison rivers here in the Grand Valley, and we co-lead that along with Colorado Mesa University and American Rivers. And a little bit more, so going back to our spectrum of engagement, moving out from our hub here in Grand Junction, we take on smaller roles based on stakeholder and partner input and needs. And so some examples of this is supporting other partnerships, such as the Escalante River Watershed Partnership, the Bears Ears Conservation Partnership, and we're also helping to grow projects on the Uncompahgre River as well. We produce an annual tamarisk beetle map to help promote outreach and awareness and support project planning and research needs. We've been publishing an annual map since 2007. So there's a lot of history there. The QR code on there and the map link will take you to our 2024 map if you're interested. And also of note is that we depend on data submitted by partners and volunteers to make this map and to cover the entire Southwest. And so if you're ever interested in submitting beetle presence and absence points to us, the 2 best ways are to use, we have a curated iNaturalist page, and you can also just send us an email to tamariskbeetledata at riversedgewest.org. Also, as Nicole mentioned, working on that larger Southwest area focus is our Riparian Restoration Conference. Next year, it will be held March 3rd through 5th in Grand Junction, and we'd love to see you there in person. I think the call for abstracts will be coming out sometime late summer or early fall of this year. And as Nicole mentioned, we used to host this conference annually, and we switched it to every other year in 2023. And so kind of bring us full circle. During the years that we don't host a conference, we host a workshop series like this one. And we hold these throughout the Southwest area. We've held them in Phoenix, Tucson, Grand Junction, Albuquerque, and online so far. And if you have any interest in partnering topics or locations for 2027, you can let us know, even though that is pretty far away. So thanks again to everyone. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Sara Larsen is the Chief Executive Officer of OpenET, and she's going to talk about how OpenET can support restoration planning, long-term monitoring, and a better understanding of water needs for healthy river systems.
Are you ready?
We're ready to go. Sorry.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. And it has been really wonderful to dive a little deeper into the River's Edge West mission and kind of understand some of the history. So thanks for that. I will just get started because I know we're a little bit short on time and I wanted to cover a lot of some of this wonderful, amazing supportive science for you and for the group in attendance. So I'll share my screen and we'll get going. What I wanted to talk to you about today are some of the emerging applications for using ET data in evaluating more natural landscape systems. And I have been using this graphic as my title slide on a number of talks because it's really eye-catching, and it was from the cover of our an article we submitted to Nature Water Journal, which has been fantastic. And when I looked at it, I realized that a lot of the agricultural areas really pop and have like some dark greens and dark blues. Lighter yellows in this coloration for this color scheme for ET. And then I want to look at the riparian corridor that's around this river and just notice how distinct, how different that is characterized and what a unique challenge that might be, where some of the fields and ag and more distinct human endeavor areas are a little bit easier to evaluate. So part of my presentation today is to let you know about this ET data science, but also to lay the groundwork for future research in this field. I don't have a lot of concrete studies to share with you of where this is being used in those riparian corridor systems. So if you know of any folks who are on the webinar, I would love to hear from you. Please send me how you've been using OpenET data for looking at riparian corridor, or just ET data for looking at riparian corridor water use and how that fluctuates over time. No ET presentation is complete without a quick overview of what evapotranspiration actually is. I have a little graphic here that tries to convey that flux of energy from when precipitation and irrigation land in the soil and saturate the soil, go into the root zone for, there are crops in this picture, but not just crops, any kind of plant that is taking up water from the soil, and then evapotranspirating that water into the air. So evapotranspiration is just that. It's the evaporation from the transpiration of plants. And one of the wonderful things about ET is that you can sense it from from space using remote sensing. And very luckily, we've had Landsat circling the globe for many, many years and have been picking up on that thermal infrared signature of evapotranspiration for a long time. So basically, the flux is very similar to when you'd go and run around in the sprinklers on a hot day. The water gets on your skin and then evaporates and you feel cooler. And satellite imagery can pick up on that across the natural landscape. We use this data for all kinds of applications. This is a very kind of ag-centric slide, and I just want to share with you that like the original development for ET data was definitely around being able to understand water use in this all-important sector a little better. We can use an understanding of ET to better operate on a field scale, looking at our irrigation efficiencies and distribution of irrigation, say across a pivot or across a field, and kind of adjust operations, become more efficient with the water that we have. We can detect anomalies. We can detect areas of dryness or where places are just, for whatever reason, are ET limited. And we're able to do that now with a relatively low latency. Depending on the cloud cover for your area of interest, we can share ET data with you within 3 to 5 days. And if there is cloud cover, that goes out to a few weeks, but it's really amazing to have access to this really incredible data set that helps folks to operate their operations in the best way that they can. And we like to liken this in like a policy regime to understanding what your spending is on your checkbook. Like you really can't balance your water budget if you have a good understanding of water supply coming in, but you also need to understand how much water you're using. So we think that bringing forward ET data is a very important component of understanding how to balance our supply and our uses and make the most of the water that we do have, especially under a climate constrained future. We have to have a better understanding of where our water is going. These are some examples of ways to use this data at different scales. You can use it for the field scale operations on a day-to-day basis, but also use it for watershed and even basin-wide planning. You can use this information to really foster and support things like water conservation programs, kind of understanding a before and after picture of somebody who's participating in a water conservation program, and also to sustain really concrete information for water markets. If there is a basin that is instituting some kind of banking or market setup, then OpenET data can be really helpful in that regard too. We're using this kind of data all across the West these days. We have quite a number of agencies and use cases from the Delta in California and the Central Valley for groundwater compliance actions, basin planning in Montana. It's being used quite a bit in the Colorado River Basin to look at basin-wide accounting and also to sustain conservation programs through the Ogallala. It's being used to evaluate, how to sustain the Ogallala aquifer and even more. Just lots and lots of different applications all over the West. Most of this is very ag-centric, which is not as helpful for this particular group. So I want to transition. A lot of OpenET got started looking at this particular sector. But what we found is that we want to acknowledge and address that things are a little bit more tied together than just the field boundaries for an agricultural field. There are watersheds up above those fields that contribute a lot of water and contribute a lot of the ecosystem services that River's Edge West is really honing in on and trying to sustain. So we want to acknowledge that these watersheds support and forestry support, the lag time in terms of water coming down into our systems, as snowpack comes down, and the water quality impacts of having a healthy watershed upstream, and then also understand how ET data can be used in those settings. So understanding how ET data can demonstrate changes over time in forest health, or if you have a management action, a before and after capture of how that forest is responding to your management action. And then lastly, how that watershed responds to a fire or recovers from a fire. So ET data can be really helpful on this more landscape-based view as well, a little bit more holistic. For this webinar, I think honing in on the riparian corridor is really fascinating and interesting. The wetlands around the stream have such an important role to play in terms of water quality and sustaining these other, biota and riverine ecology systems that can't be understated how important it is to monitor the health of these riverine areas. And the interesting thing is that the riparian corridor is incredibly complex. It is so much more than just precip coming down and irrigation being applied, going into the root zone and then coming up as plants, because you have this flux of water that is coming through the stream, but also in the adjacent bank areas, you have subsurface flows that are coming and going. You have contributions from groundwater. So when you look at ET data for a riparian corridor, there's a lot more to it. There are a few more unknown variables that are tougher to tackle than in, say, a more agricultural setting. So I just want this whole group to be really mindful about it. That's one of the reasons why this is still a growing field of inquiry or line of inquiry, is because there are a lot more unknowns. And we still can use ET data in these settings, but there are some caveats to that. Just want to be mindful of that. But incredibly important to monitor, and I think we'll see a lot more applications of this data in this kind of setting in the future. I want to tell you a little bit about our team. We have been working on sharing OpenET data, or putting together OpenET and sharing ET data for quite a while. And it's a really amazing partnership of people. It's very similar to the River's Edge West. We really treasure our partners. And we have partners all over the country who have worked very hard to understand ET science, pulling their resources together. So instead of competing for which models are working best or better in different places, what if we all work together and decide to work on what best available science may be as a group? So we really treasure and value kind of our open science approach, and the fact that these researchers decided to pool their efforts and make their data freely available, make it as transparent and reproducible as possible, to talk about the accuracy, to talk about the known issues with this data as much as possible, and basically make this an open book. So we have an incredible team of people that are working on this, and lots of partners too that of other organizations that support the platform itself. For OpenET, if you want to find the ET data, we have a whole bunch of ways to access it. You can go to our data explorer, and I'll show you a quick tour of that in a little later in my presentation. You can access it through an API or through Google Earth Engine. You can also look at the code that supports all of the modeling in our GitHub repositories. And then we've provided a very specific tool called FARMS, our Farm and Ranch Management System, to help you as operators, or in whatever your area of interest is, it could be a riparian corridor, be able to monitor how ET is changing over time. So FARMS allows you to actually get reports on things that you care about in an ongoing way, which is really awesome. In OpenET, we have 6 different models that generate ET data, all from these various consortium partners that have been working in this field for a long time. And people always ask, like, which model should I use for my purposes? And the answer is it depends. You know, it depends on the area that you're interested in. And each of these models has some inherent pluses and minuses for different landscape settings. But generally speaking, we ask that everybody start out with reviewing our ensemble model, which is an aggregate of all of these 6. It's kind of more of a middle of the road evaluation, and ensemble is a great place to start when looking at your particular application. Another question that comes up is what is the accuracy of this information? And one of the key things for riparian corridor use is that we just don't have as much instrumentation in situ ground truthing for riparian and wetland settings as we would like. Back in 2023, 2024, the consortium partnership, our OpenET folks conducted a really tremendous effort study to evaluate the accuracy of the OpenET data and models with any in situ ground truthing that met some really strong thresholds for accuracy. And so they did this study and broke down, shared all the information, how the models were performing, but realizing that we just don't have as many of these like blue square riparian towers. We don't have as many of these like light green wetland areas. So we really don't know exactly how well our remote sensing tools are performing in those kinds of settings. It's a real challenge. Those results are in the Nature Water Journal, as I mentioned, and you can find that if you Google Volk in 2024, that's what you'll get. I already talked about kind of the unique nature of the wetland setting, but I just want to reinforce for you what a challenge it is if you pull ET data for a riparian corridor, just know that there are a lot of other variables at play. And it really can be difficult to kind of suss out some of the subsurface flows back and forth in and out of the river, in and out of the banks, contributing groundwater. So just be mindful of that, like when pulling ET data for those kinds of settings. Here are some of the plots of performance. I just want to highlight that there are very few dots here in the wetland and riparian area that reflects our lack of instrumentation. And our closure or our R-squared values for that setting are about 0.76, which isn't bad, but it certainly isn't quite as high as we would like to see. We're typically getting an R-squared value of about 0.9 for croplands. And some of the other areas that are listed in this Volk study, we really do kind of struggle to make sure that we're performing well, but we do need, we need that extra instrumentation. Grasslands, wetland areas. I don't want to get too far into the numbers, but just, know that you can take a look at those in the Volk study and try to understand, whether or not this is going to be a workable tracking method for riparian use. Some of the ways that we envision this data being used in the future, when we are able to get that in situ ground truthing and be able to refine the models for these applications, are being able to review the impacts of your restoration actions. So if you do a non-native species removal or native revegetation, these kinds of infrastructure changes to a riparian corridor, can you detect the before and after evapotranspiration that's occurring for that location? Or can you get a sense of vegetative stress from those actions? Similarly, you can evaluate your riparian corridor in terms of operations. So let's say you have a very dry channel stream and you decide that you're going to make a big pulse flow to support native species or to support the adjacent banks. Can you monitor kind of a before and after setting of that kind of an operation? Can you monitor if you reduce your releases from an upstream storage unit? can you monitor the ET for that? All kinds of ways to evaluate, or at least get a sense of how your vegetation is responding to these different settings, either environmental or human imposed. Very interesting questions. One of the most important questions, I think, is to look at these areas over a really long time frame. Like, is ET going up in riparian corridors or your area of interest over a longer time frame because of warming temperature? Our science predicts that ET will be increasing in a warmer environment, and are we actually seeing increases over time in that? That will be some really important work that is on the horizon. Wanted to give you a quick demo of a data extraction around a riparian corridor that I was looking at the other night, like how, if I were to approach this, how would I do it? And want to also share a preview of the portal for you. If you zoom into an area of interest, you can click on a given set of field boundaries and get the ET over the past 5 or 6 years. And if you want to take that more holistic approach and look at just the watershed or outline your own area of interest, you can switch over to our raster view and delineate an area that you're most interested in yourself, which is really awesome and powerful. I decided I would go and look at the Dolores a little bit downstream of McPhee Reservoir just for fun. This looked like a really interesting corridor that had actually had some kind of restoration applied to it in terms of some check dams and maybe some new meandering introduced into it. So I thought it would be really interesting to see if it could detect any changes in ET for this area over time that was either reflective of operations or reflective of the changes made to that area. And so I'm just going to walk you through getting access to that ET data as a raster layer, outlining a polygon that I'm interested in looking at, running that computation, and then getting the results back, and not being able to see anything really concrete apart from the change in the hydrologic situation from year to year. So we have 2020, where ET is peaking at about 5 inches. That again in 2021, in 2022, which was a really dry year for the Grand Junction area, you see a little bit of a drop. And then 2023, which was one of the wettest years that we've had, a big pop, and then back to normal. So being able to track at least some of the climatology that's associated with the riparian corridor is really helpful. And I think if we could take out the precipitation picture and also understand more about our operations, you'd be able to actually isolate the ET that's occurring based on some of the changes that you're making to manage that particular area, like a restoration activity and or an infrastructure installment. You can look at cumulative ET over time and even get access to daily evapotranspiration data for a particular area if you really want to dive into the details. I spoke a little bit about farms and just wanted to share that for you as practitioners, if you're interested in the ET that's occurring on your field or a riparian corridor that's next to your field, you can actually outline those and submit them in our system and generate reports from those in an ongoing fashion based on the parameters that you're most interested in. If you're most interested in ET or precipitation or NDVI, which is that vegetative stress picture, you can enter all that information and then have it sent to you in an ongoing fashion, like every couple of days, every week, every month. We've really tried to make this farms tool as easy to use as possible, and serve as a way for folks to monitor their operations and now on a landscape actually monitor riverine systems in a more holistic way. And then lastly, you can get that kind of information on your phone, which is really helpful. We just have a quote from one of our farmers who uses the farms tool and what a fan he is of being able to use that in that kind of setting. With that, I'll stop. I've taken my 20 minutes. I am curious if there is time for any Q&A or if we want to wait to the end. Sorry, Nicole.
We definitely have time for some Q&A. I think we began a little bit early, so yeah, we still have time if anyone has any questions they want to send in.
It looks like we have one question already, and it says, very interesting OpenET presentation. Sara, are there active plans to expand in situ ground truthing in riparian and wetland areas that we can look forward to?
That's a great question. And I'm wondering if Brenna Meffert in the GJ. Great question. So before I came on board OpenET, I worked for the Upper Colorado River Commission, and the commission worked with the prior administration to actually put together a plan that would help instrument the Upper Colorado River Basin. You know, Western Colorado and the Western Slope is a big central part of the Upper Colorado, and to better understand how our basin was being impacted by climate change and to be able to operate a lot better, be able to understand forecasting, be able to understand our uses. The UCRC put together a plan to add more eddy covariance towers that serve as instrumentation for ET data. So there are new towers going in all across the upper basin. There started out being about 4 or 5. Now we're talking about upwards of about 20 that are going to be contributing to understanding ET across the basin a lot better. Most of those are probably going to be in agricultural settings where we have a landowner who's willing to host an EC tower. And but I do think there are plans to have some of the towers be in locations that are a little bit more like natural landscape settings. I know of at least a few that are currently there, and at least a few of those to be in wetland settings. So I think we will see that a lot more in the Upper Colorado generally. Around GJ, I'm not sure. So I'd have to get back to you on that. Any other questions?
I had a quick follow-up question. So you mentioned a little bit about putting in these instruments. I guess I'm curious on kind of a smaller scale, as far as like specific locations, what goes into that decision process, and like what makes an ideal location for you to be prioritizing the locations of these instruments?
Great question. That's really awesome. A lot of it has to do with like the logistics of finding a place where it's going to remain undisturbed. So finding a willing landowner who is interested in hosting some scientific equipment. And there's a lot that goes into the siting. You know, you want to have a more distributed network so you're getting a lot of good coverage. But you also need to take into account like the topography that is around that tower, the eddy covariance towers or weather stations, and the any kind of water body that might be nearby that would contribute to or confound some of the eddy covariance measurements. So a lot goes into the siting. When you are looking at a spot, you want to make sure that there's some homogeneity around it and that you understand the direction that the wind is generally coming from so that you're getting the conditions of the upwind fetch coming to the tower as part of the results that you're going to get out of the tower. So there's a lot that goes into the siting, and having a wetland area that has, wetlands on all sides for quite a number of yards and out for ways, but have it be in the middle of it, have there not be mountains really close by on either side would be an ideal setting. Finding that, and then also finding somebody who's willing to host it and then getting access to maintain those towers, that's a hard combination, but I think we can do it. Maybe River's Edge West would have some suggestions.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have a couple minutes. There's one more question.
I did throw a
Alicia,
lot of information
yeah,
at you guys. I
yeah,
apologize.
maybe we'll digest it and get back in the panel.
I do have
One
to leave
final,
a little bit early. I apologize, but
oh, that's okay. Well, let's just do this question now then. This is from Elisa. What is the cost for OpenET monitoring tools for private users? Also, is it costly to implement new wetland and riparian towers?
I think we got to that second question, but to answer the first, all of the data that we share on the OpenET platform is free. We have talked about having a price tier for commercial users, and I think that that will be something we need to consider in the future. But because of our partners' support, you can access your data within limits. Like you can't scrape everything, you can't get the whole West, but you can get a certain number of polygons and acres every month to look at on your own. And most people don't bump into those quotas. You have to actually use quite a bit of data before you hit our quota limit. So please go sign up for the portal, go check out the fields that you're interested in. It's really fascinating um, to be able to explore ET data for your own backyard.
Great, thank you. Thanks again for your presentation. I think we're gonna move along to our next presenter.
Okay, thank you. Turn my camera off.
So our next presenter is Alicia Langton. She is a geospatial ecologist with Ecologist here in Grand Junction. And she's going to talk about restoration monitoring using high resolution imagery and QGIS Riverscapes Studio. Alicia, do you want to share your screen and take it away?
Let's see if I can get this going. Hit play. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that? I think so. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me here. And it'd be pretty cool to get a raise of hands. You can do that at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you use QRiS currently. And I have it set up so I can hear it ding whenever somebody raises their hand. So I got one already. Anybody else? Just a few people? Cool. Awesome. So for those of you guys who don't know, QGIS Riverscapes Studio, or called QRiS, is a QGIS plugin that helps you organize, analyze, and share your riparian monitoring spatial data. I'll be showing you how I use this software for my monitoring projects. And this is not going to be a tutorial, but rather a bird's eye overview of QRiS so that you can decide if it's something you're interested in using. First, a bit of background. Several useful tools have been created for us restoration practitioners by the folks at Riverscapes Consortium. And I think it's primarily led by Joe Wheaton and his team at Utah State University. They saw a need for a more efficient way to manage an increasing number of restoration projects, as well as to track and share information between many different organizations that are doing riparian and wetland work, like the feds, state, nonprofits like Rivers Edge West, and privately owned companies like mine. So to give you an idea of the scale, I'm showing you a map of the over 300 projects uploaded on Riverscapes PBR Explorer, which around 100 organizations have contributed to over the last few years. And PBR Explorer is really cool because it helps meet that need for cross-organization tracking. So organizations know if there's been another project in the area that they're working on. And then QRiS is their tool for us practitioners to create and analyze restoration monitoring using GIS. So like this would be for the GIS analysts among us. And then the data exchange is where you can upload your QRiS project to share your data within and between organizations. The exchange also has a large collection of spatial data sets created from models, and some of these models have come directly out of Utah State University, such as watershed boundaries and riparian condition, beaver assessment tools, etc. And gosh, there are so many other Riverscapes Consortium tools that you can explore on their website, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so here's my shameless plug that we should be monitoring our sites pre and post restoration to detect system-wide changes and then adaptively manage them. Of course, monitoring using field-based drone or satellite imagery have their own advantages and disadvantages, just like Sara talked about with satellite evapotranspiration, for example. But drone collected imagery allows us to efficiently collect information at a resolution that's fine enough to digitize individual landscape features and then monitor their changes in response to restoration. So let me show you what this looks like on QRiS. Okay, I'm going to play this and hope it works. There we go. So after you install the plugin, you're going to add a project. If you haven't created one, that is. Or in this case, we're going to open a project. QRiS projects are stored as geopackages. And then open that, and it opens the QRiS plugin interface. The interface is used to add and store the raster and vector information that you use for your project. But the organization piece of this is really key. It's pretty elegant. Scrolling down. So data capture events are temporally discrete features that provide quantitative evidence of landscape health and project outcomes. They're organized in sets of riverscape features that you digitize, like geomorphic mapping, floodplain, hydrology, vegetation, structures. And then you can add, these are the ones they have currently available. Hopefully you can see that, so I don't have to read all of it. I'm just going to show you how you would add them from your previous DCE event. Okay, and this is where your analyses then are stored. I'll show you more about that in a few minutes. And then this adds the data to the layers panel so you can start digitizing. You can see I've already created a lot of digitized riverscape features. Just to make this easier to see. You can see how everything you've added in the plugin interface is now in the layers panel. I'm just going to make things easier to see again. Turn that off. Okay, let's look at surfaces down below, which are raster data sets like the drone orthomosaic you would have captured or any other data like elevation. You can also use satellite that allow you to interpret and more accurately digitize your features. So I've got my ortho, my DTM, and my relative elevation model. I use the REM to help define the valley bottom and the sample frames. Sample frames are polygons defining distinct sections of the project area that you're going to be using to calculate metrics and indicators. Sorry, I had to pre-record this. Okay, let's look at the data. Make things easier to see again. I'm going to turn off some things so we can go through it one by one. Okay, first I'm turning on the active expense of the floodplain and geomorphic data sets such as channel junctions and in-channel geomorphic units. You can see that they are stored as different types like primary, non-primary channels and different kinds of channel junctions that you can better use to understand what's happening in your riverscape. Then I'm going to turn on inundation extents, where the ground is inundated, that you can see from your high resolution imagery. And here they're separated into classes of free-flowing, overflow, and ponded. So you can better understand what kind of habitats that may be created with restoration. Then I turn on my vegetation extents and my structural elements. You can see those lines are dams, actual beaver dams. And then let me show you how you would digitize parts of your riverscape. So you would just edit it as you normally would in GIS and add a polygon. And in this case, I'm going to digitize a river hawthorn. So you can see how you go around and do that. And you would just close it out just normally. It's just like operating in QGIS. It's not its own separate thing. And when you close that out, it brings up information that you can add. So for example, is it riparian or non-riparian, woody riparian, or if it's suitable to beavers, in case I'll put moderately suitable. You can also add notes. And then that's done with your digitization. And when you're done, all done, you can go and perform an analysis. So I'll make this a little bigger so you can see. So you go down to your analyses and create a new analysis. Okay, here you see that you can choose how you have what unit of analysis that you use. And there are many analyses you can choose from that calculate area, length, density, counts of your data capture events. Then I'm going to show you the summary of your metrics, and then you can go ahead and export them. So that just shows a summary of them, and then I'll skip forward here, and then you can export them. Okay, going on. So this is the output. These are the results I got from 1 year's metrics. And then you can do a trend analysis of your data sets to follow the trajectory, and then hopefully make adaptive management decisions. You know, I only have 2 years of data here, so not much opportunity to really show you a trend analysis, but you get the idea. Really, this is really important though. When you're working with digitization and long-term monitoring, there are some elements that you should follow for monitoring in QRiS. First, monitoring should inform adaptive management and focus on metrics that are relevant to the project goals. Then the data you spend time and effort collecting should also actually provide reliable, strong signals of riverscape changes. And there needs to be consistency in the digitization methods between years so you don't contribute additional error and dilute any signals of change. And finally, I think it's important to know that your site and habitat characteristics, you should know them. You should go to the site, figure out what's there, what vegetation's there, and take a lot of photos and even do some ground surveys, because it really does help inform your digitization, your aerial digitization. And finally, and I think this is kind of one of the coolest pieces of QRiS, is that you can choose whether to put your data in the cloud. So they have the data exchange online, and it's an online hub for sharing as well as displaying your QRiS projects. Different users can open your saved projects, edit them, add new years of data, and re-upload. So it feels almost like gone are the days of like sending shape files through email. And then you can also make projects private, which is something I do, so that nobody can see them except you and the other people that you give permission to. This is really important for private land projects. Thank you so much for listening and also for all you do in restoration. Feel free to contact me. You know, I don't have a huge online presence, so emailing me or finding me on LinkedIn really works best. And I'm also adding some links here for you that you can go back to later. I'm going to add this as a PDF, and I think Rivers Edge West is going to put it up on their website at some point. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing if I can get there. Huh. Can't see my, there we go.
Great, thank you, Alicia. There is a question in the chat we have some time for. Ari asked, can QRiS be used for V-dike style restoration, such as rock structures in ephemeral and intermittent channels?
That's a good question. I think QRiS can be modified to however you want it. I think currently they have a pretty, the structure that they've created that has the data sets that they've provided you. However, you can actually go into the XML code and add more information if you want. So you can really, more features that is. So like if you wanted to add in-channel or rock structures, for example, you could do that and you would just have to go into the XML code currently. But I think they're working on making it a little bit more flexible for non-traditional users.
Thanks. A similar question along that line. Are there any training resources available for QRiS for first-time users or those with limited GIS experience?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's really good to be a GIS analyst or have some experience operating QGIS, so you don't have to learn both at the same time. But you can go online and they are starting to build out their training manuals. I'd say their documentation was pretty poor at first, but they're really taking it seriously now and starting to build it out. There are two guides in the links that I provided. Actually, maybe I should share my screen again real fast so that you can get that.
Sure. And like you said, we will be sharing these presentations.
Yeah, there you go.
For folks to follow up on. Do you think that this could be, are there potential applications for using this? And I'm sorry if you touched on this. Are there potential applications for predicting, like for planning the installation of low-tech process-based structures that you can use in planning efforts to kind of predict impacts?
I know there's a section for designing your projects, but in terms of, you mean predicting the results, like modeling?
Mm-hmm.
Modeling your results. I don't think QRiS has that functionality. However, it could be that they have something that Riverscapes Consortium may provide a tool that would allow you to take your information and model it. For example, the Beaver Restoration Assessment tool, BRAT. I haven't ever used that, but I know that that's kind of a predictive modeling tool based, how acceptable a landscape would be to be a beaver reintroduction. I don't know if I understood your question, but hopefully I answered it.
I think you did. I have a pretty basic knowledge of this kind of stuff.
Okay.
Cool. And I don't see if anyone else has a question, you can enter it into the chat. Or if not, we can save it for the panel. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we will move on to our next speaker. Alicia, thank you so much for presenting. And our third and final speaker is Dr. Daniel White, an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering at Colorado State University. And he will present on the influence of riparian vegetation species composition on meandering river dynamics. So Danny, you are all good to go. And Danny, you're okay. Got it.
There we go. Cool. Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so before I jump in, I just want to acknowledge my collaborators, Casey Pennick at Utah State, or at Ohio State, and Wally McFarlane at Utah State, who have contributed significantly to this work. So yeah, as John mentioned, my talk is about the interplay between riparian vegetation, channel migration, and large wood in desert rivers, specifically rivers in the US Southwest. As you all know, these rivers are dynamic systems where vegetation patterns, channel movement, and wood recruitment are linked in ways that we can either sustain or in ways that can either sustain or degrade the health of the riverscape. So I will share a perspective on how these processes interact, what's changing, and why it matters for restoration and management. Oops. There we go. Okay. So yeah, when we talk about whether a river is healthy, we're really asking how well it supports the organisms and ecosystems that depend on it. For riparian plants, fish, aquatic insects, and wildlife, that health is rooted in processes, hydrologic, geomorphic, and biotic, that have shaped these systems over millennia. The stream evolution triangle from Castro and Thorne helps visualize this. It shows how flow, sediment, and biology are intertwined. Hydrology controls how water moves and when floods occur. Geomorphology shapes the physical habitat through erosion and deposition. And biotic processes like vegetation, growth, and decay both respond to and influence those physical changes. In a healthy river, these processes are in balance, not necessarily static, but dynamic in a way that organisms have adapted to over thousands of years. And in dryland rivers, that balance can be fragile, and even small disruptions can ripple through the system. The three main points that I'll touch on are why are rivers the way they are now and where are they going? In the desert Southwest, many rivers are changing rapidly because of shifts in flow regimes, sediment supply, and vegetation are reshaping channels and floodplains. These changes don't just alter the look of a river, they influence habitat quality, connectivity, and resilience. Today, we'll explore some of those changes and, more importantly, talk about what they mean for restoration. I'll also briefly describe tools that we can use to assess a river's biogeomorphic trajectory or its combined ecological and geomorphic path into the future, so we can better anticipate outcomes and design interventions that work with rather than against natural processes. So let's start with a dramatic example from Chinle Creek in Canyon de Chelly, Arizona. These before and after photos from work by Cadal, Rathburn, and Cooper show very dramatic changes over just a few decades. In the earlier images, you can see a wide active channel with not much vegetation. And then in the 2006 photos, much of that open waterway has been replaced by dense riparian vegetation, including willows, tamarisk, and other large woody species, and the active channel has narrowed significantly. Changes like this are happening in many rivers in the Southwest. Here's another striking example, the San Juan River, from recent work by Miller and colleagues this year. The before and after imagery here shows that the active channel area has decreased by about 73%. In this case, the change reflects the combined influence of vegetation growth, shifts in the hydrologic regime, and other interacting riverscape processes. Reduced frequency of large floods has allowed woody vegetation to establish and mature within the channel. And that vegetation, in turn, traps sediment and further narrows the flow path, to a nearly single-threaded plan form. And as we saw with Chinley Creek, this kind of channel contraction fundamentally alters the system's dynamics. It reduces habitat for native fish, limiting floodplain inundation and changing sediment transport patterns. These two rivers show us that narrowing isn't just a localized phenomenon, it's a regional pattern. And so understanding the causes is critical if we want to predict where and how other rivers might respond. So understanding these rivers' historical condition may also give us insights into the habitat that native and endangered fish may need at different life stages as well. So to bring the focus to the White River, which will be the focus for the rest of this talk. The White River flows through eastern Utah, starting in the high country of the Flat Tops in northwestern Colorado, and it winds its way down to meet the Green River in Utah. It's a medium sand and gravel bed river with broad floodplains, meandering bends, and a mix of native cottonwood and willow stands, as well as extensive stands of invasive tamarisk and Russian olive. Although there is a lot of restoration being done to remove both. The river runs through a largely undeveloped semi-arid landscape, which makes it a great place to study how vegetation, channel movement, and sediment processes interact without the heavy influence of dams or major urban areas. I'll describe some analysis we've done to assess its biogeomorphic trajectory, or in other words, the direction and pace of change in both its physical form and its ecological character. The White River is a living example of the processes we've been talking about, and its recent history offers valuable insights into how dryland rivers evolve and how they might respond to restoration efforts such as removal of Russian olive and tamarisk. So when we walk up to a river, our first impressions often depend on our background. So if you see a tall, freshly eroded cut bank, do you think of it as a problem or a sign of instability? Or when you see a large log or whole trees in the channel, do you see a safety hazard or an obstruction to be removed? These perceptions matter because they shape how we approach management and restoration. But from an ecological perspective, the story is pretty clear. Dynamism, or the erosion, deposition, and migration that constantly reshape a river, is a sign of health and function. Messy, complex channels with irregular banks and multiple flow paths create a variety of habitats, and large wood in the river is often a keystone feature, providing cover for fish, trapping sediment, and creating hydraulic diversity. So part of our challenge is reframing what healthy looks like, understanding that some of the features might seem like problems are actually essential ingredients for a functioning riverscape. Yeah, so wood in the river is good and messy is good. So rather than zeroing in on single features, like a cut bank or a log jam, it's helpful to take a step back and look at the whole system. This drone image of the White River lets us see the bigger picture, how the channel winds across its floodplain, how vegetation patches are arranged, and how sediment is being stored and mobilized. When we take this broader view, the focus shift from individual symptoms, things that we might label as degradation or as health, to the interactions among physical and biological processes. Floods, sediment supply, vegetation growth, and channel migration are all part of a feedback loop. So understanding these linkages is a key to predicting the river's trajectory and deciding how or whether to intervene. So when we think about a river's biogeomorphic trajectory, it helps to break it down into three interconnected components, like I referenced in the stream evolution triangle. First, hydrology, or the patterns of flow that set the stage for everything else. USGS gauge records give us decades of data on flow magnitude, timing, and variability. Second, geomorphology, the channel's plan form and how it evolves over time. Is it meandering, braiding, narrowing, or widening? These patterns tell us about sediment transport and channel stability. And third, biology, the riparian vegetation community and large wood in the system. Vegetation influences bank stability, sediment storage, and floodplain development, while large wood creates complexity and habitat in the channel. So to study these, we rely on a combination of tools, long-term gauge records to capture hydrologic trends, and in the case of the analysis that I'm presenting today, repeat high-resolution satellite imagery like NAPE to track changes in channel form, vegetation cover, and wood recruitment over time. So starting with hydrology, because it's often the driver behind so many other changes, on the White River, gauge records show a roughly 15% reduction in spring discharge when we compare the historical period from 1929 through 1949 to the more recent record from 2000 to 2020. That's not insignificant, especially in a system where spring flows are critical for channel migration, sediment transport, and resetting vegetation. But it's also worth noting that this decline isn't as severe as what we've seen in some other tributaries in the Colorado River Basin, where reductions have been far larger. Still, even a moderate decline in peak flows can mean fewer opportunities to scour banks, create new bare surfaces, and recruit large wood, all processes that maintain a dynamic, healthy riverscape. So moving from the hydrology to geomorphology, we've observed several notable patterns on the White River. The channel has narrowed in some places, but it's far from static. So erosion and deposition are still actively reshaping the system, driving continued migration. We've also seen shifts in plan form, though the river has remained a single-threaded meander throughout our study period from about 2000 through 2024. For this analysis, I used RivMap, which is a MATLAB tool to do the migration analysis, but there are several other open source tools to do similar analysis, including AMM, which is an ArcGIS toolbox, and ARCAT, which is a Riverscapes consortium tool. So one process we're paying close attention to is the rapid colonization of point bars by Russian olive. When the Russian olives take hold on the inside of a meander bend, they can trap sediment more efficiently, building up the bar, and that extra deposition essentially pushes the flow in the river toward the outside bank, which can accelerate erosion there. So in some reaches, vegetation encroachment isn't just stabilizing the channel, it's actually influencing where and how the river migrates. This interaction between plant colonization and channel dynamics is central to the White River's current trajectory. These NAPE images give us a clear visual record of how quickly Russian olive has expanded along the White River. I used an automated classification tool in ArcPro to do this, but there are a handful of other object-based image analysis tools in QGIS and Envy. Starting in 2006 and moving through 2021, you can see the shaded regions here steadily filling in. Those are areas where Russian olive have established and spread. In some places, these trees appear first on point bars or freshly deposited surfaces, and over time, they expand across more of the active floodplain. This growth pattern not only reduces open channel area, but as we discussed, it can accelerate deposition on the inside of bends, shifting flow toward the outside bank and influencing migration patterns, channel migration patterns. By tracking this expansion in high-resolution imagery, we can connect vegetation change directly to geomorphic processes and start to quantify how much influence invasive species like Russian olive have on the river's form and function. Here's what that Russian olive expansion looks like from the ground. These photos, which I took in June of this year, show dense stands of Russian olive forming a nearly continuous wall along the river's edge. And behind that wall of Russian olive are older cottonwoods, likely over 20 years old, that established when they didn't face competition with Russian olive. We did find a couple of point bars, though, with a good number of young cottonwood seedlings, and we'll be watching those sites closely to see how they fare in competition with Russian olive. And you can see one of those point bars that's basically covered by cottonwood seedlings there in the lower right. Switching to another directly related biological component, large wood. We've documented about a twofold increase in wood density along the White River. The graph on the bottom right shows that increase across 6 different reaches, with some areas experiencing a much sharper rise than others. In this case, the increase may be linked to 2 processes that I pointed out, the rapid expansion of Russian olive and an increase in channel migration. So as Russian olive colonizes stabilizing point bars, it accelerates the flow toward the outside bank, causing channel migration, which can undercut and topple cottonwoods into the channel, adding to the wood density. More wood generally means more habitat complexity and more geomorphic heterogeneity, and it creates pools, sorts sediment, and provides refuge for fish and other organisms. But here, it's important to recognize that this boost in complexity is likely emerging from the same vegetation shifts that are also driving channel narrowing and altering floodplain connectivity with the increase in density of Russian olive. So this conceptual model sums up how I think the White River's biogeomorphic trajectory has been evolving. In the past, the river migrated at a moderate pace. Wood recruitment was steady but not excessive, and invasive species like Russian olive and tamarisk were absent. Cottonwood forests regenerated naturally, and the system maintained a balance between physical processes and riparian vegetation. And then in the present, we're seeing an increase in migration rates, higher wood recruitment, much of it tied to Russian olive expansion, and a rapid increase in the presence of invasive vegetation. The system is still dynamic, but the drivers of that dynamism have shifted. And looking to the future, if current trends continue, we may see dynamism decline as invasive vegetation locks the channel in place and occupies both the inner and the outer bank, reducing wood recruitment and crowding out cottonwood regeneration. That would mean a more homogeneous, less resilient riverscape dominated by invasive trees. This trajectory isn't inevitable, but it underscores the importance of understanding how hydrology, geomorphology, and biology interact so that restoration and management can influence which path the river takes next. So in this drone image taken this year, you can see Russian olive taking hold on some of the point bars and beginning to trap sediment and build up the inside banks. And then at the same time, the outside bank is still actively eroding, toppling the mature cottonwood trees into the channel as large wood. Right now, the system is in a transitional phase. We still have active migration and significant wood recruitment, but as Russian olive continues to expand, those outer banks will eventually become stabilized as Russian olive colonize them. Once that happens, the cottonwood galleries that line them could age, die, and not be replaced at the same scale, leading to a long-term loss of native riparian forests. So this time series graph brings the main processes together. We start with a period of increasing channel migration rate, which is the black line, a time of high dynamism, followed by a gradual drop-off as the system begins to stabilize. Invasive vegetation, which is kind of that silvery green, increases rapidly until it stabilizes. And then in-channel large wood, which is the brown line, Peaks after migration rates, reflecting the lag between active erosion of vegetated banks and the delivery of that material into the channel. But as migration slows, so does wood recruitment. Cottonwood forests steadily decline, both from aging stands and from reduced opportunities for new recruitment. However, these trajectories are not fixed, and river management, especially Russian olive removal, could alter this trajectory. If invasive vegetation can be reduced before it locks the channel in place, we may be able to ensure cottonwood regeneration and dynamic stability. However, we need to understand the scale at which removal or other restoration actions needs to occur to actually preserve or restore healthy riverscape functions and processes. So without matching the scale of intervention to the scale of the process, it becomes difficult to ensure long-term success. So additional research into the effectiveness of past and future restoration actions is critical. And building on some of this preliminary analysis, conceptual modeling that we're developing, we are looking at incorporating floodplain vegetation, species, composition, and physical traits into a meander migration model so that we can predict how, under future and current restoration actions, the river will adjust. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Danny. We have a question in the chat. Are there other rivers that are further along in the process of decreased dynamism and native riparian vegetation decline that you have looked towards to confirm your analysis?
Yeah, quantitatively, we haven't done that, but there are a bunch of studies that have looked at like the San Juan, the Price, some of the other rivers that show that the rivers have become dramatically more stabilized and narrowed. So yeah, I think, I would say that along the trajectory of our hypothesis, there are a bunch of examples that are kind of more toward that highly stabilized, less dynamic condition. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Thanks. Can you provide a general cost for doing this type of project?
Like doing a full detailed analysis of historic migration rates and potentially trying to predict future migration rates?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, so at least kind of from my perspective and within the organizational structure that I work as a professor, I think that this would be it would be a great opportunity for a graduate student to develop a thesis that does more detailed analysis, looking at both satellite imagery coupled with field-based analysis. And typically, the cost for funding a graduate student's research and tuition, if you think about, the cost of tuition, and then a stipend for a graduate student is typically about like $1,000 to $2,000. Well, about $2,000 a month. And so you can kind of extrapolate from there, thinking about the fact that a project like this, at least for the white, I think would take about 2 years. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, I just kind of had a question about how the remote sensing models, how they were validated and like what sort of parameters should be in field measurements should be taken.
Yeah, good question. So with the object-based image analysis that I did in ARC, I fed the model a bunch of areas where I had identified Russian olive and then said, here I have this about 50-kilometer stretch of river, try to classify the other pixels based on their coloration, essentially, their RGB values. And because Russian olive has such a distinct color, it's pretty accurate. But I went through and validated the majority of, a bunch of points where I knew there were Russian olive stands, and yeah, it's pretty accurate. And because Russian olive, they look so unique, it works pretty well. Yeah. Thanks, Melissa.
We have another question in the chat from Scott. I didn't quite catch this. Why does non-native riparian vegetation lock the channel in place in a way that native cottonwood do not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, Russian olive, because they are so resilient and don't require very specific hydrologic and geomorphic conditions to get established, basically, if there's any disturbed surface, they take over. And they do great if there's a drought. They do great if there's not a drought. Whereas cottonwoods, so cottonwood seeds, they move downstream and are germinated via hydrochory, which is a process where during a flood, that seed floats down the river. And then if there is an area where there is bare soil or bare sediment that has the specific characteristics that are required for germination, then the cottonwood seeds will germinate. And typically this requires, first of all, you have to have a big flood that will mobilize the sediment to develop these bare, freshly disturbed surfaces, and you have to have the right sediment size. And so it's tricky. First of all, it's a lot harder for cottonwoods to become established at all. They require a lot more specific conditions, and so they aren't germinating and growing as quickly as Russian olives. But then also, as young cottonwood seedlings are flexible, and willows are flexible, and so if there's a big flood, they sort of just get laid down, and oftentimes can be rooted out. Where Russian olive, they take hold and are really effective at stabilizing the soil and the sediment in a way that cottonwood and willow are not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have another question kind of along those lines. How effective can Russian olive removal and cut stump treatment be to increasing cottonwood regeneration on large scale?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think a question that a lot of folks have, because you have to think about, at the scale of channel evolution, at like the reach to segment scale, you have to think, how much Russian olive do we have to remove to produce the conditions suitable for cottonwood regeneration? Did I say that right? Yeah, we have to think about how much Russian olive we have to remove, for cottonwood to regenerate. And so I think in terms of promoting bank erodibility, it's been clearly shown that removing Russian olive or cut stump treatment is very effective, because the channel is able to migrate. The banks are much more erodible. And so some studies have shown that in that context, Russian olive removal it's very effective and very cost effective, because you almost immediately get kind of an increase in dynamism at the scale of the treatment. But the piece where you're asked about increasing cottonwood regeneration, I think is tricky, because we really don't have a great way of controlling the regeneration of Russian olive, at least now. And so, they will likely continue to be competing regardless of the treatment in terms of reoccupying a point bar that has fresh sediment deposition. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Brandon.
Yeah, I think I always find that question interesting, because it's kind of the establishment of Russian olive is a symptom of, in some ways, it's a symptom of an issue with the functioning of the riparian system, but then it also exacerbates that scenario too. And it kind of just becomes this cycle of, like feeding it back and trying to reestablish those natural processes.
Yeah,
like you were saying, that do encourage cottonwood growth.
for sure.
Um,
But so John, that when I saw a couple of those point bars out on the river this spring, it was that were just covered in cottonwood seedlings. I was really surprised to see that because, it does require such specific conditions for germination. And so, if we can try to beat back the Russian olive at a scale, it's effective. And then we do have the relatively unaltered hydrology, which the White River is a good example of. Maybe there still is an opportunity for, trying to at least allow for a really good year of cottonwood recruitment. And then maybe we do some like specified, highly focused treatments to make sure that the Russian olive don't take over where the cottonwoods are recruiting.
Yeah, and there's another similar question from Jim. I've been using machine removal of large Russian olive and putting that into San Juan, then killing root sprouts. Do you think that is a good idea?
Yeah, and then Jim, it says you talked to Casey a lot about that pre-COVID. I don't know if it was where you're talking about the application, Jim, but Casey and folks did a study looking at how introducing or placing dead Russian olive or recently cut Russian olive into the channel, how it could be a potential restoration strategy. So the seed dispersal mechanism of Russian olive is tricky because I think it's often via like zoochory. So a bird will come and eat the seed and then take it somewhere else, and so it spreads in ways that are a lot harder to control. And so I would, my opinion is that, if you can increase habitat, obviously there are balances that you have to weigh out, but if you can increase habitat maybe for like a critically endangered fish species by increasing structure within the channel or creating habitat diversity in the channel, then maybe that could be worth placing the cut Russian olive in the channel. But I don't know. I don't know that that's been studied enough to say that this is something that we should be applying at a large scale. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Jim. And thanks for the question.
Awesome. Melissa, do you see any more questions coming up that are specific to Danny?
I don't see any specific.
Let's see.
Might be. Looks like maybe we could move to general questions for the panel of speakers.
Yeah, that sounds good. Alicia and Sara, if you're still here, I know you said you had to leave early.
Yeah, just a quick note. So Sara had to hop off, but I would encourage people, go ahead and send questions in the chat and we'll make sure we get those sent to Sara. And we'll also be sharing her contact information if you want to reach out to her directly. So there'll be a follow-up email and I'll try to get answers to anything sent in the Q&A today. And then she said we're welcome to reach out via email.
And also for the panel, you're welcome to enter questions into that Q&A box. And you can also, if you prefer, you can raise your hand and we can allow the attendees to talk and ask that question directly to the panelists. So one question that came up for the panel is that using remote satellites and drone imagery data is exciting for monitoring and planning. But I noticed in all three presentations that there's still a dependency and an emphasis on the importance of ground truthing and being on the site. And I'm curious, for your projects, are there ways that you can see folks on the ground or even citizen scientists like rafters or hikers being able to contribute to some of these projects to get you information that you need without you personally having to go out on the site?
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Waiting for Danny to answer. I think we were both waiting for each other.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think coming from like a field science background, I think that seeing the things that are being analyzed in person is invaluable because you can get a sense for how things are changing through time at a very fine resolution. And I don't know, I also think that experiencing the landscapes that we study and are trying to restore is really important. And I think that information can be transmitted. John, you're saying potentially including citizen scientists or recreators to share some of the information or make observations. I think at least from the perspective of like some of the work that myself and Casey and Wally are doing on the White River, I think having photos, like repeat photos of specific locations on the river where we have identified hotspots of meander migration, or maybe one of those point bars where we are seeing cottonwoods regenerate, I think would be, that would be extremely helpful. I think I also think that it's really important, or it's very valuable just to include folks that care about the landscapes because it gives them a sense of stewardship and understanding the processes that sustain the ecosystems in which they recreate. I think there are many benefits to including a field component, but obviously using satellite imagery, especially openly available satellite imagery, is really helpful for reducing cost and doing time series analyses. But yeah.
Yeah, I echo what Danny said. From a GIS perspective, especially operating on, QRiS, there are certain things that you don't necessarily need to be on site for. So, for example, you'd have a drone operator go and do their flight, or it would be drone or satellite. And then as the analyst, you could pretty rapidly identify channels and channel junctions, inundation, a lot of the other more coarse scale biogeomorphic data. But when it comes to more tricky data like vegetation, I think it's really important to at least have some information about what's on the ground, so species especially. And just having that component as an ecologist, I think, is important. So that's my perspective. I think that's both our perspectives on it, because we probably all started out in the field for 10 hours a day. And so we really think that's invaluable. But as the GIS analyst, if you can't get out there, I think you do the best that you can do, and hope that the data that you do collect is appropriate for not being on the ground. So, like I said, getting your channel information, and you can see dams. Sometimes it's good to actually be on the ground to see what the wood is being used, so you can tell the difference between a dam and like a wood jam. But that's my understanding of it. I always encourage people to get out, but again, you may not be able to.
Okay, thanks. Another question that came in is for the remote sensing component of these projects, what imagery sources are most useful? NAPE. And then kind of a follow-up question, do you struggle with only available data being leaf off?
I've used NAPE for a lot of different projects, and yeah, you just have to hope that they did do the data collection when it was leaf on. And sometimes you have cities or counties that are contracted to do leaf off. And I've actually talked to my county, so Mesa County, about next time they do a flyover to consider doing it leaf on. But we'll see what happens. So yeah, sometimes you can struggle with it, but I haven't had a trouble with the projects that I've worked on. And satellite imagery, I think it depends what you're using. I think the thing that's up and coming is pay for satellite imagery, because there's so many satellites up there that are collecting imagery all the time, and they want you to pay for that data. So, you can go and contract a data collection over a pretty large area exactly when you want it. So that's kind of the up and coming thing, rather than using like Landsat or Sentinel.
Thanks. Danny, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so NAPE, I think they typically collect that in like June, right? Or during summer. And so I think yeah, at least using NAPE imagery, typically we don't have the issue of it being leaf off, and doing veg classification with NAPE imagery typically is pretty effective.
Can I ask a dumb question that maybe other people don't know? What is leaf off versus leaf on?
No, not a dumb question. Yeah, so in the fall or the winter months, when the leaves fall off the cottonwood trees and the Russian olives or whatever, the leafy vegetation, the riparian leafy vegetation it becomes a lot harder to distinguish the vegetation species, because there are no leaves, and yeah, and the leaf, yeah.
I'll say a pro for having both is looking at deciduous versus evergreen, mapping that. That's pretty fun to do.
And Tyler had more of a comment. One thing I learned is that having quality imagery goes a long way. We had 50-meter resolution, and using some vegetation tools were not very true to in-field observation.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. And sometimes it even comes down to, depends on what you're looking for, like 10 centimeter data. I like using 10 centimeter data because we can really see everything. But that doesn't work for some people when they're processing power on their computers. So like, for example, if you coarsen the resolution to 1 meter, you wouldn't be able to detect some dams and some other features that are a little bit smaller. The list goes on, but smaller features just in general. Danny, what do you think?
Yeah, so in some of our large wood detection and classification analysis, ideally, so large wood by definition is at least 10 centimeters in diameter, and I think what is it, 2 or 3 meters long? Or anyway, yeah, at least 10 centimeters in diameter. And so if you have sub-meter resolution, then what you are seeing as a log jam, or something that appears to be some kind of a log structure, may not be composed of like key pieces that are large wood that function a lot differently, both hydraulically and geomorphically, than like an accumulation of very fine or very small woody material. So yeah, having finer resolution imagery especially like drone imagery is really good for large wood classification and identifying, if there are specific metrics that you want to quantify, like volume or area, that you want to analyze at scales that are finer than like 1 meter resolution, then, yeah, having the drone imagery makes a big difference. Yeah.
Thanks. Another question that came in, as someone that coordinates restoration projects but might not have the technical expertise, how does one get started using some of these tools?
I guess you hire somebody. But if you don't want to learn it, then you have to find somebody that does know it. And I'm not sure, maybe through the Riverscapes Consortium, maybe they have, well, there's organizations, I forget what it's called, but it's, you can go on their website and you can be a part of their consortium, so to speak, and find other people who are using QRiS or other software or doing remote sensing and help you out. If you want to do it, there are ways that you can learn. But it just depends if you want to put the effort into it. What do you think, Danny?
Yeah, I think that there is a pretty strong or like a big increase in the number of people that are making documentation for and training freely available for their tools. Like at least in science, we or like in academic institutions, we try to make the data and the methods that we use to do analysis freely available, or describe them in a way that somebody else could go and do the exact same thing. And so there are, I think sometimes it takes some digging to find those resources. But I think there is a lot more online instruction or just resources that are available freely that you can sort of teach yourself. It just, yeah, I think it takes a little bit of digging, but there are definitely a lot of resources.
Thanks. And also, someone commented, Tyler commented, oh, it's a link to the Riverscapes Consortium website and community board at riverscapes.net. So we can probably include that also in our follow-up email along with presentations.
Thanks, Tyler. That's exactly what I'm talking about, going on that community board and finding other riverscapes, like restoration practitioners and QRiS users.
Awesome. Oh, this question is for Alicia. What types of data does QRiS help track throughout the course of active management on a riparian restoration project? And how do you get multiple partners involved in using QRiS to share their project data? Oh, you're muted.
Oops. In my presentation, I go over I show the list of the tools that are available. If I were to read them out, let's see, I wonder if I could find them real fast. But generally, it's a number of biological, so like vegetation components, hydrological, so inundation, and channel features. Boy, the list goes on really. I can't, I wish I had a picture to show you right now. I don't have that. But then at the end of the presentation, I do go over how you would go ahead and upload. You would upload your data to the Exchange, and in a separate presentation, I would have gone over exactly how you would do that and how you would share it. But there are resources online through the Data Exchange that show you how to do that.
Awesome. And we'll be sharing your presentations via our website as well, so that information should be available to folks.
Yeah. Sorry, I wish I couldn't list off the 25 plus things that you can track.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any more questions coming in. We can do a final call for any Q&A, any comments, questions.
I can't seem to type a question, so I might ask one. Alicia, you mentioned that one of your slides, we should be monitoring pre and post restoration projects to help guide adaptive management. I'm just sort of wondering what particular metrics that you were thinking would be important to quantify, or are you just referring to like drone footage or NAPE imagery, or is there particular metrics you think we should be collecting, like pre and post monitoring, that would be helpful in the QRiS modeling?
Oh, yeah. I think I was really referring to drone imagery, but getting out there in the field is always my recommendation, especially pre, to get a sense of your landscape that you're dealing with. But it's mostly just drone imagery. So collecting drone imagery before the restoration implementation, and then periodically after. So first year, third year, fifth year, whatever you're able to do. And sometimes it would be ideal to do it at the same time during the year, as well as the flow that you did the first year. So try to keep it standardized.
Awesome. Well, there are no more questions in the chat box, and we're kind of getting towards the end here. So I think we can start to, oh, there is a question. Here's a question I think we have time for. A question for Sara. I live in Taos, New Mexico, and work for the Taos Soil and Water Conservation District. We have a very robust ag community who irrigate via acequias, surface water, and not supplemental groundwater pumping. We are very interested in how effective acequias are in recharging our groundwater stores through spreading and dispersing water. Can OpenET app be used to monitor irrigated lands on a county-wide scale beyond just private lands? And I think that is a great question that we will probably follow up with Sara on, and we can share that answer in our follow-up email.
Yes, absolutely. We've copied that down, so we'll make sure Sara gets an answer for that one. While we're waiting for any last questions to come in, I just wanted to share my screen one more time. And if anyone has a moment to fill out our little survey, that would be really helpful. Provide feedback and ideas for future workshops, even our conference coming up in March. So there's a QR code and the link there. It's only a few questions, shouldn't take too long. And then we can stay on for a few more minutes in case anyone else wants to send in any questions right now. But again, we'll share contact info for all of our speakers. And I wanted to say thank you again, Danny, Sara, and Alicia, for sharing about your really amazing work. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone who attended as well.